Hey everybody, welcome back to Turn Bark Time. I'm the Turn,
I'm the Bark.
and we are going to be here a long time. Guys, we don't want to tell you yet what episode we're on, but it's a big one in terms of the whole podcast series. Also, shout out to our new listeners. A lot of my 7th graders were excited to listen to us, Bark, and I heard you got a couple of people on listen to our history of tacos.
Yeah, some of those AP World kids jumping on. Maybe some staff members, maybe just some former students. I think looking at the names that are popping up on the Instagram.
Love that.
So just some childrens that we've had in the past that are now old enough to make their own decisions and apparently are willing to listen to us yammer.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Especially some that haven't even ever met me, which is even better, right? Like, that's the best part. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is season 6, episode 2. Now, we do want to clarify this with an opening statement before we get into the topic. We did tell you that what the topic was last week, but we do want to clarify this is probably not an episode to listen to with children due to the violence nature of our topic, which tonight, Mr. Barker, and via Mr. Ramsey, Mr. Scott Ramsey, El Jefe, his idea that he's been clamoring for 6 seasons. So here we go.
Yeah, it is. So I think I'm looking at the name card here. What did I call it? I called it terrible torture methods, speech impediments. But beyond listening to us for a number of episodes, you're choosing to come back, so I guess it's not torture. We looked at this and we said, we independently both had the thought that said, this is a huge topic.
Huge.
So big, so great, so much.
Great relative term. We're gonna go ahead and call that a relative.
Yeah, great as in like the number of examples.
Yes.
And so we both asked the I guess,
El Jefe.
Yeah, the El Jefe, the requester. I don't know.
Yep.
Of the episode. To be more specific, and he kind of gave us like, let's stay in the olden times.
Yep.
And so we're gonna work our way through some torture methods, and I'm gonna lay it out there. Like, when we think torture in the modern term, like, I think like people survive, and in the Middle Ages, like, that really wasn't a priority.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start light, and then I think we'll kind of work our way progressively if people are willing to put up with us.
I love you light. Like that.
Yeah. And then we're gonna go into darker.
Yes.
More. How would we say this in education? Level 2 and 3 interventions.
Yes. Yeah. There we go. That's the way to do it.
So I mean, in the beginning, right? I think about like hurting people doesn't take a whole lot.
No.
It's the one thing that people have spent a lot of money figuring out, and we keep coming up with new inventions to do this. Yeah. And I think the most simplest way to hurt people, looking at the preponderance of evidence in history, is to use gravity and body weight.
Yep.
And so, like, the one that I always talk about, like, nobody expects it, according to Mel Brooks. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. No. But during the Spanish Inquisition, like, a lot of people think that they use the Iron Maiden, which is like the coffin with the spikes in it, right? It pokes the hole in the juice box, and Despicable Me. Yeah. No evidence that they ever used one in medieval ages. Like, they were made later as like a showpiece to like scare people, but like really weren't used because it's a lot of investment. Yeah. When all you really need is rope.
Yep.
And so, like, one of the preferred methods of the Spanish Inquisition was called the strapado, where if you imagine like you're getting handcuffed and you extend your arms behind your back in a straight, like, lock your elbows out behind you. And now imagine that we tie your wrists together and take a meat hook and raise you up.
Oh.
pulling your body weight essentially against your shoulder blades until you repent, confess, convert, or your shoulders pop out of your socket, and then shock takes over and you probably pass out.
Yep.
I talk about that one every year just to like give kids an idea, and they're like, wow, that's pretty terrible. I'm like, yeah, dude, you would probably answer the questions the way I want if we did. Another one, it's called the Spanish donkey because it was used during the Spanish Inquisition, is essentially if you imagine like a pommel horse from gymnastics, except for it's like a prism shape and pointy at the top, like a triangle, a rectangle with a triangular top. And you just sit on top of that for an extended period of time as a punishment. And again, if it just like the Strapato, if your body weight, if you didn't weigh enough, they could add weights to your feet.
Yep.
To add extra gravity to the situation, no pun intended. And I was reading an article, they actually said that George Washington, there's a document in 1775 where George Washington sentences a William Patton to essentially ride the donkey for 15 minutes as a punishment. Right. So like there was something similar that was used in the Civil War called riding the rail. And it's basically the same idea that you sit somebody on a less than ergonomic seating situation for an extended period of time. But like if enough weight is applied, like it cripples people.
Yep.
So I mean it's not complicated, unfortunately. People understand human physiology and like how to inflict pain. So like adding on to that, like during the colonial time period, people would often be forced to like straddle a rail, and then they would actually be stripped of all their clothes and then covered in tar, and then covered in feathers, tarred and feathered. Which most of the time, I think the tar is, I would imagine they use hot tar.
You'd have to, because otherwise it's solid.
Yeah.
So it has to be warm.
So it's warm. I mean, there's a great but terrible depiction of this in the John Adams miniseries from HBO. Unpaid solicitation, by the way.
Yep. Way to go, Paul Giamatti. Just watched it happen.
Yeah, unless Max wants to throw some money our way. But yeah, like, and you just imagine like trying to remove tar from your body and then also being covered in feathers. Like it's not something you just go home and wash off. This is the idea is that it's supposed to be that one. While if you don't get the tar off, it can lead to your body not being able to regulate temperature, and so it can lead to other health impacts that way. For the most part, it is to just like socially ostracize you because you've got freaking tar and feathers on your body that shouldn't be there, and you look like a
chicken
ragamuffin.
Yep.
So.
But we talked about it, like I always mention it when we talk about tar and feathering, especially when we talk about like tax collectors. I don't show that scene just because the guy's pee-pee comes out, and I'm like, nah, don't need to see that. But again, the hot tar on you would be probably one of the most painful things. But then the second thing, and they did kind of a good job. I didn't realize this happened until I actually watched Liberty's Kids, which I know we've made jokes about Liberty's Kids in our, being a way to teach the revolution, and it's just not thorough. But one of the things they talk about is they talk about one of the characters in that show is pro tarring and feathering a tax collector. And then the guy, Ben Franklin, which obviously didn't actually happen, but Ben Franklin takes him to the house of the guy who got tarred and feathered, and they show him all bandaged up because the way I describe it to the kids is like, how many of you have ever had a scab before? How many of you have ever peeled that scab? Or how many of you have ever like skinned your knee? Like it's not bleeding, but it's just like that layer. I was like, imagine that happening over most of your body. And I said, and you guys know your skin is your biggest organ, so you're prone to infections and things like that. Like it's not okay. So
yeah. Rounding out the non-lethal methods of torture, this one, it's called the pear of anguish, or the choking pear. So if you imagine it is a metal pear with kind of looks like a bottle opener.
Okay.
Like if you imagine like a screw mechanism on the bottom, and you could put it like into somebody's maw, right? And then like if they weren't being truthful, you could just ratchet it open and it expanded, forcing the jaw to meet the requirements of the pair. It could also be put other places, but we'll leave that to your imagination.
Yep.
But again, not designed necessarily. I mean, it's kind of in that simple mechanics, like kind of like pre-industrial revolution, but like we still understand we have like wine presses and printing presses.
Yep.
And so like we're like, hey, if we can press paper, we can press wine, we can
Press somebody.
And it's like another one that I didn't, bonus content, wasn't even on the list originally because I thought it was pretty tame.
I need you
compared
guys
to
to
everything
know
else.
that he has a huge list, and I made him taper it down so this doesn't go for 10 hours.
Um, is thumb screws,
Yep, classic.
right? Like it's just a really simple, like it's the application of technology that already exists, but instead of an economic purpose, it's an immoral purpose.
Yep.
So yeah, like people, using simple mechanics. Nothing in this list is overly complicated.
Yep. And that's where I can jump in on mine too for my non-lethal one, because my other ones are lethal. But like the one that jumped out at me was keel hauling. So basically, you're on a ship, and from what we have, at least the references I found, keel hauling really took place in like the Greeks mention it in the 700 like BCE, but really we get like a detailed description of it more in the 1700s. So an example of this was there was the Dutch Navy did this as a form of punishment. So there was a sailor named Jan Blank, and their punishment for desertion of the Dutch East India Company was they were keel hauled, whipped a total of 150 lashes, and enslaved for 2 years. So what keel hauling is basically you have your beams on the outside of a ship, and there's two ways you can do this. You can do it the width of the ship or the length of the ship. So from bow to stern or from port to starboard. But basically you would take somebody and you would tie them to a rope, and then you would tie lead to them. And then that rope would run underneath the ship and to the other side. And so if it was a punishment like this person, you're not trying to kill them, you're punishing them. But what you would do is you would drop them into the water and you would pull them to make sure they hit the bottom of the keel. And for those of you who aren't boat people, the keel is the main beam that runs underneath a ship. And so you would hit that. Well, remember, what do most ships have underneath them, right? Other types of debris, whether it's barnacles, oysters, whatever's growing underneath. Oysters is a stupid answer. Barnacles is what I'm gonna stick with. But right, they're not like fluffy, they're sharp, right? And then you would pull the person up the other side. And it actually says in the description that you need to give them a chance to feel the pain. And then you drop them again and you do it again, right? And you go back and forth, right? If you're trying to execute the person, keel hauling usually was then from bow to stern or stern to bow, and you would run them the whole length of the ship up to the other side. Usually we're dead by then, determining drown, most likely. So.
Well, you figure most, like, I'm trying to think of like during that time period, those boats are somewhere between 75 to 120 feet long.
Yep.
So yeah, that's a pretty long time to hold your breath.
Well, and then not to have it's not like where I would say a human probably could hold their breath the length of a ship. However, you're being thrown overboard. So it's not like you're like, okay, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, right? Like, so that's going to be, you're not going to live through that. But I just always I remember them saying like you get keel hauled, and I was like, oh, that just gave me a little shiver down the spine. So I only have one, guys. Barker's more adept to this, and I cannot wait. He's been saving one. I just need to preview this. He's been saving one that he's excited about. So we'll find out. And excited again is because he discovered something unique. That's what makes it exciting.
Well, there's a lot of these I've heard of. So I mean, like, I think I'm gonna like start at like probably like most well known, and then work my way to what I think is probably the most. It was probably pretty widely used, but probably not very widely talked about because it's gives you the.
Yep.
The next one I'm gonna talk about is impalement, right? Just like putting sticks through people. And again, it's not complicated.
Nope.
It's a pointy stick, and you
run it through them.
Well, I watched one. I was listening.
You watched one?
Well, no. I didn't watch one happen. They can't do that.
I'm joking.
But they said that the Romans, to like start it, they called it the pit, despite the fact that it wasn't a pit. It's more of like what we'd call a spit.
Okay.
Oh man, that there's another one I left off the list. But anyway, caveat for a later date.
Okay.
If we don't get banned or booted for this one.
Yeah.
They said that the way that they would set the spit, if you imagine, like, right, there's the spit, right?
Yep.
The pit, is you would lay the offending person on the ground and attach their feet to animals.
Okay.
And have them run away from the pointy end of the object to set the pointy object.
Oof. Duh.
But they would stop them before it completely killed you.
Yeah.
And then at that point, once it was set, they would lift you up
and leave you
and let you set. And it wasn't necessarily to kill people, but often did.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I don't know how that would be designed not to kill people.
It's very unpleasant.
Okay.
A lot of these methods, like, I think one of the ways to think about it too is that they're designed to. The old school mentality was that if we do really terrible things to people, like, people won't be bad. People will listen.
Right. They wouldn't.
Right?
Everyone. It's a fear
deterrent.
Yeah.
It's a deterrent.
Yeah.
And probably the most well-known impaler, right, is Vlad, right?
Dracula. He's not Dracula. He's based on Dracula. Dracula's based on him.
Yeah. He's from, like, what is it, Wallachia or something like that. But like, they were skilled in skewering people where they could put it into a person and bring it out through the clavicle, your collarbone, without puncturing any vital organs. And then again, gravity does the work.
Yeah.
Right. Gravity is what holds you there. You have nothing. You've no point of leverage on the post. And so, like, they estimate that it usually took about 3 days for somebody to expire.
Jesus.
But if you imagine, like, rolling up to go fight somebody and there's human shish kebabs.
Yeah.
Like, people are out there, like, lamenting their existence on a stick. And you're like, are you going to go mess with that guy? Or are you going to go home and go mess with somebody else? Like, yeah, it's probably pretty effective.
Yep.
You know, in the same way, it's, well, wasn't going to talk about it, but like the Romans, right? The Romans used crucifixion, right? But crucifixion is different because crucifixion is not an impalement that kills you. It's suffocation, right?
Yep.
You put all of the weight of the body on the diaphragm. They make it sound like, I was reading some stuff today and they made it sound like it was pretty fast. But normally you didn't drive. So, like, if you're familiar with the story of Jesus, right? They put nails through his hands and his feet, which actually, again, gives him a better leverage point to, like, you have to, like, raise your body up. You have to, like, do like to pull your body up to pull the body weight of your trunk off of your diaphragm to bring air in and out so you can breathe. And by having the nails in his hands and his feet, like, that theoretically probably gives him more leverage points to actually, like, actually makes it longer and more terrible.
More painful, yeah.
But like, crucifixion was done, like, you talk about, was it after Spartacus that they crucified, like, all the people, like, along the Appian Way?
Yes.
Right. They would crucify, like, every mile, like, there was, like, a person just, right,
nailed to him,
expiring. Yep. So again, part of the public display is part of it, but yeah, we don't do that anymore. That violates everything. Pretty much everything we're describing violates the Eighth Amendment in some way, which is cruel and unusual punishment for you non-civics people.
Yeah.
Another one that's I think is pretty common now that people have heard about is the use of rats.
Yeah.
It's terrible. Like, so, like, the Tower of London, during the same time that they would put people on the rack, like, they had, like, cells where they would put it just above the water line. So when it would flood in London, like, all the rats would just come in and they would just, like, chew on people, and they just kind of leave them down there, let the rats do the work.
Yep.
And then like other people throughout history goes all the way back to the Roman times. And like, I think about it like Game of Thrones borrowed the idea. But they say it was first written about, a lot of these are written about like during the 1500s because like, right, printing press, like literacy's up, writing more, probably happened before then, but this is where we have the first accounts of it. But you essentially take some sort of a vessel, you put a rat inside of the vessel, and it needs to be a vessel that is made of ceramic or metal so that you can heat it and make the rat uncomfortable. And then the rat will trigger like survival mode and they start trying to find a way out. And the way out is through the person.
Yep.
And I mean, like, as crazy as this is, like, we weren't going to go recent, but like in Argentina under Piaget, the regime of Piaget, like there was a number of people that they modified this torture method. And like the way that, like, if you think somebody's going to be able to answer a question while a wild animal is tearing through them, I don't see what, like, it's not really, like, often people think about torture as like a way to get like
answers.
Like, this is just people being terrible.
Yeah.
Right. Like I don't see how like anybody in there is going to be in their right faculties as that happens. As soon as something starts biting me,
yeah,
I immediately will try and remove said item. Right. Like I'm not thinking about anything else that's happening. Yeah, pretty darn terrible.
Yeah.
Pretty traumatic for the rat too, but nobody cares about that. But yeah, and rats can get through a lot of stuff.
They can, and that's the crazy thing is they can eat through a lot.
And when they're in their fight or flight mode, and like you're what they're flighting through, like it's not going to be pretty.
They don't care.
Okay. The penultimate, so like number 2 on my list.
Okay, hold on.
Is something called escape. Okay.
Hold on. So, are you? This is your penultimate, or this isn't your penultimate?
This is I'm on my number 2. I've got 2 left. Well, my number 1 is kind of a combo.
Okay. So, okay. Yeah, you go ahead. I got 2 left too, but you go ahead.
Okay. My number 2, and this is one that I've known about for a while. And whenever it comes up and kids are like, that's terrible, I'm like, well, did you know this? It's called scaphism or the boats. I saw one today that called it the barrel, which is essentially just like the Europeans ripping it off from the Persians. Okay. So like this is recorded by Plutarch. So some people question, like with any of these, like they go back and they kind of question like the validity of the source because it's so long ago and so terrible, despite the fact how terrible humans are to other people.
Even today.
Yeah. So a soldier named Mithridates accidentally killed the king's brother. Shot an arrow, accidentally kills the king's brother. And so they sentence him to death. And so what they do is they take and they put him in a boat. And they leave space. So like they're going to take 2 boats and essentially make like a floating coffin. But your arms and your legs and your head stick outside of the boat. And then before they put you in the boat, they feed you a ton, like so much milk and honey to the point that like your stomach is distended, like you're like literally stuffed with milk and honey, which doesn't sound so bad. And then they cover you in honey, but like intaking that much milk leads to apparently a really severe case of diarrhea. And so like you sit out there and you bake in the sun as they put you in the water, and you essentially sit in your own filth and you're covered in honey. So insects and other animals that like things that taste sugary, we're going to come up and try and get that off of you and bite you at the same time. And so you're essentially exposed to the elements. And if you survive a day, like they come back and they feed you more milk and honey, like every day that you're alive until you're not. And I think there was one account that said that somebody lasted like 17 days.
Oh my God.
Of just like, and you're just in your own mess. Like, and they're not cleaning the boat out. The whole point is to not clean the boat out. And so like, eventually you have, and like you have insects that are laying like larvae, and so there's
Yep.
worms and there's hornets and there's potentially rats because rats like food, and you could be food. You know what I mean? So like it just, you let people kind of cook in the sun while they're, I mean, there's other methods. The Romans had one where they put somebody inside of a, essentially like sewed them up inside of a donkey skin that was pretty similar. Um, Made me think of like Luke Skywalker on Hoth, but
Yeah.
this is more like putting Luke inside of a tauntaun on Tatooine,
Yeah.
instead of on Hoth.
Yeah.
But like the idea of like forcing people to be around their own excrement, inviting vermin, and then like vermin who are vectors of disease
Yep.
to essentially infect you until you die of, again, the whole purpose to be very slow and very
Yep.
unpleasant
Yep.
as possible.
Ugh. Oh. My next one is not as bad as that. I probably should have jumped in before that, but that's okay. So I'm doing a classic, as weird as it sounds, but this one is to be the most painful death, I guess, physically possible. So this is hanging, drawing, and quartering. And we hear about this a lot during like the American Revolution and things like that. Is like this was going to be the punishment if they founders were captured, kind of deal, and the War Revolution didn't work. But basically, this is a treason law in England and Ireland. That's why this comes out as like if the American Revolution failed, this is what would happen. But basically, you were drawn first. So what they would do is they would basically tie you. They'd put like a hurdle on the back of a horse, and then they'd tie your feet to that, and you were drug to your hanging. And then you were hanged almost to the point of death. So again, not a good hanging where you're like C3 and C4 are supposed to just snap and you're done, right? Like it was a strangulation kind of deal. At that point, you were then emasculated if you were male, so meaning the cutting of genitalia off and things like that. You were then disemboweled. And for those of you who don't know what disemboweling is, that's where you open up your stomach and your intestines and everything like that, just flop out and everything like that. After that, you're probably still alive at that point, and then you get beheaded. And then after you get beheaded, then your body is tied to each limb is tied to a separate horse, and they slap you on the butt at the same time, and they rip you into 4 pieces, hence the quartering. So again, you know you're going to die, but they're going to make it last a lot longer, right? And again, this is a for treason specifically, usually is what this was saved for. And so obviously, again, like we've talked about earlier, the goal is to keep people from doing horrific things. In this case, treasonous things against your country. Again, how you feel about your country. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And so again, you could be risking this punishment if you were caught. And again,
Well, this is what's depicted at the end of the movie Braveheart.
Yes, thank you.
Right, William
Yes.
Wallace is there. Like they give you that movie's rated R, but if they truly showed the full Monty, like it would become an NC-17 or even above that. Like it would not be something that they would even be like marketable, just because of the barbarity of it. Like, but yeah, again, like the whole idea is that we're gonna do terrible things to you so that people won't do. Like it seems really odd because for thousands of years people do terrible things, going, "Don't defy us," but almost in every case, like one of those people gets like the title of being a martyr, and it actually rallies people to the cause.
Correct.
Right. And I mean, like I don't run a government yet, but like do you let dissent fester, or how do you put it? Like is there like a nice middle road where you suppress rebellions, but you do it like quietly or nicely? Right? I don't know. Like humanity hasn't figured it out yet.
Yeah, and there's not. I don't know. I mean, we're also as creatures, I'm sorry, it also comes into like we watch this stuff, right? Like it's weird to say, but like you can think of like I think of like the games in Rome, right? A stadium's gonna be packed with thousands of people to watch someone get eaten by a lion. Like it's just that's the other part of this. As I look at it, I'm just like, part of this is like we as humans, we tend to have this problem. So all right, buddy, I know
Do you want to go with yours
let me
first?
do mine, because you've been
I'll let you go back to back.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Oh God, this is not one that you want to go back to back with. All right, here we go. Okay, so the last one I'm going to do is probably one of the most horrific ways to die, which I know, again, we talked about torture, and this is torturing someone to death. So this is called a blood eagle, and it's depicted in poetry. There is a debate on the authenticity of this. However, there's enough there that I feel like as a historian I can say like there's a possibility of this happened due to the depictions of it and things like that. So this is called the blood eagle. It takes place in like Scandinavia. It's a Viking thing. And so basically what happened was you're placed in the prone position. So again, laying on your stomach, and you are cut open from the back. So your ribs are exposed. The ribs are then forced upward into a wing-like shape. So it looks like you have wings.
Like
and
an
then,
eagle.
Yep, like an eagle. And then your lungs are also pulled through the opening. And again, this is originally seen in literature, but there is some authenticity. If anyone out there is an Assassin's Creed game player in Assassin's Creed's Valhalla, they actually show. I don't know if they show. I haven't played that game, but they said they referenced that they had shown it in one of the that video game that it happens. So it's not the most fun way to die, but like a guarantee. I mean, and the goal again is not to kill the person. The goal is that when you're cutting this person open, that you are keeping them alive. You're breaking their ribs, but you're not puncturing any of the vital organs, right? You're trying to keep this person so they experience the whole thing before death. Ugh.
Probably gonna hit shock at some point and pass out.
You would think so, right?
Have to.
So.
Okay.
It's like the and we reference, like we said we weren't talking about a lot of modern day, but it's like the stuff with Deadpool, like how he becomes Deadpool, right? Mm-hmm. Like it lowers his oxygen level just enough, but then right when he's about to pass out, it kicks it back on, so it keeps him going. So, all right, Bark, this is the one you've been saving for the people.
So the number one, and I'm honestly like a little surprised, but like the more I thought about it, is the flaying of people, like skinning people while they're still alive. And so like we've already talked about, like your skin is your largest organ. I did some reading because like, again, for me, Game of Thrones, they talk about it's House Bolton, right? And their sigil is a flayed man on it's like on an X. It's an upside down man who's flayed. And like they don't obviously depict anything in the books. It's pretty graphic because it's a book. You can use your imagination. Your imagination is a scary place to be. And then I kind of thought about it, like, how prevalent was this? And like people are like, it's pretty much used in like the Americas. It's used pretty much on every continent. Somebody at some point was removing skin from people. And one of the ones I was reading, they said, well, you can't just like, your skin is designed to be attached to your muscles and your musculature and stuff like that. So like, you can't just like take it off. And so like what they said is like one of the ways.
Challenge accepted.
No. One of the ways to kind of like prepare the victim is either like to let them get extremely sunburnt
Oh, okay.
because it causes like the skin to swell, and so like it's ready to like peel,
Yeah, like simmer.
so to speak.
Yeah.
And then the other way is by boiling people.
Oh, gee. Oh, so that's why you're comboing those.
Yeah, because like you know, some people boil people, and again, that's rather pervasive as well. And there's even some claims of like governments into the 21st century boiling people. Right? So like if it's not methods of torture aren't broke, don't fix them, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
And I mean, we could probably do a whole episode on like stuff that happened in World War II between the Nazis and the Japanese unit that, you know, conducted all kinds of terrible experiments on like exposure to extreme cold and extreme heat,
Drowning.
yeah, and things of that nature. But like they were saying that they would normally start with like the legs because like you would make really long vertical incisions because you're trying to, and as terrible as it sounds, like, like humans have been removing skin from animals for millennia.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's how we make clothes. That's how we understand the process of skinning deer, cows, right? All these other animals that we use. And so like we essentially just take that same skill set and apply it to people. And like if somebody was, they said if somebody was a really skilled flayer, you could essentially remove all of the dermis from a person and keep them alive. But like the terrible thing about it, like as they were talking, like as I was like reading stuff and listening to some other videos, your skin is connected to the muscles, and where there's a nerve, that means there's a nerve ending. And so as the skin is removed, it's triggering those nerve endings. And essentially like I think about whenever somebody talks about like hitting a nerve, I think about the oh shoot, the movie where the guy had his arm stuck between the boulder and he had to like saw through his arm.
Hours.
Huh?
127 hours.
Yeah, where he had to like saw through his
own arm off. Yeah.
And where he's at the point where he's cutting the nerves with his pocket knife. And so like they were saying, like ideally, if you want to be like the most terrible, you would start and like you would flay the head first because you have the most nerve endings in your face. And then like the goal was to try and make it as, you know, as complete as possible.
Yeah.
And then like you talk about like, well, what do you do with human skin?
There's a lot you can do with human skin.
You can, well, people in Nazi Germany made lampshades. You can make.
Isn't there books? Like,
yeah, I was going to say, like at Harvard, they found a book
that was human skin.
Bound in human skin.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it's an animal. Like humans are animals. It's an animal skin.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about it, like, I mean, it seems kind of weird to say, but
this whole episode has been weird to say. So let's just keep rolling.
Morality's on pause.
Yeah.
This episode. Sorry, but sorry, Mom.
She's not gonna watch. Don't worry. Mine's not either.
She's probably done by now. My brothers are still listening. But again, like the thing that's going to cause you to die, obviously, like you're going to go into shock, right? Because there's so much nerve damage happening and like overloading the system. Blood loss, right?
Yep.
Because you're going to bleed, and like as you go into shock, your body's going to try and pump more blood to. But I mean, like again, like the major veins and like arteries of your body are not intact.
Nope.
Not attached to your skin. So I mean, like the main plumbing is still intact. But like the one thing that I thought was that I was surprised by is that one of the causes of death is actually hypothermia.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because your dermis, right, it's your skin. It allows you to regulate, it helps regulate body temperature and like, you know, by opening and shutting pores.
Yeah.
Right. And sweating and things like that. But like if you remove the skin, your body loses that ability to regulate.
Yep.
And so like you can actually like there's actually there's a doctor who said like, yeah, like it's possible that you could actually die of hypothermia because your body gets too cold.
Yeah.
Right. And like the part that I think about that's rather than flaying like a whole person, like, cause obviously like, right, they're going to die, but like, what if you could do like an arm or like a forearm or a leg, and then like there's accounts of people like after you flay them, then you put salt on it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so like there's just an immense amount of pain, or even if you like, I don't know, like a digit, right? The amount of pain that that would cause, you know, just to try and if you're trying to elicit information.
Yeah.
But I mean, like we all know now, or well, we should all know. You will all know now after you watch this episode,
Yeah.
right? Any kind of testimony that is gotten under duress
Isn't real.
yeah, like at a certain point, like basic psychology says that you will defer to authority. And if like police sit you in a room, and we've seen there have been numerous cases over time where a person has been interrogated for 14 hours, and then at the end of 14 hours, despite the fact that they said they didn't do it for 13 hours and 50 minutes, the last 10 minutes they say, yeah, I did it, and they confess to it, and they essentially tell you how they did it. And because they're confessing, like nobody questions it, when in reality it was like they psychologically broke to get there. Now, what works better than psychologically breaking people, which takes more time, and that's another episode, if y'all want it.
Oh God. We have to have, you got to give me at least like 5 episodes in between that and this.
Got to have some happy episodes in between.
I really
yeah, I made steak tonight too, so it was.
Oh, Jesus, Bark.
It's been an interesting night.
Yeah. Hey.
But we know that people under physical pain, to get physical pain to stop.
Yeah.
Right. You will say whatever is needed to make the pain go away.
Right.
So like I was talking with my kids, we were talking about the Middle Ages and talking about like the witch hunts and stuff. Cause I was like, well, like people were like, what about America? And I'm like, well, you know, like Disney didn't completely screw up because, you know, the Sanderson sisters get hung, and that's how they killed witches in America, as they hung them. They didn't burn them. And so like, you know, talking about that and looking at it and going like, you know, they would throw women into ponds with like rocks attached to them, and if like you drown, like you were innocent, but if you floated, you were guilty of being a witch. And they're like, seems like people just die. And it's like, I didn't say it was a good system. I just said it was a system.
It was the system.
So, I mean, like, we fully recognize that this stuff, you know, we fully recognize that this stuff is not the best way to handle problems.
No.
But
I feel like most of these things we've talked about today, like, have less, are less about, what's the word I'm looking for? They're less about like trying to get answers about something, and more about like a full-on punishment. You know what I mean? Like it's not like what we've talked about today is less about getting answers from people, don't you think? Like overall?
yes.
Because it's more about like the death of people. So. But.
All right. Well, I think we put this one to bed.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm gonna have to go like sit on the couch and watch some happy TV before I go to bed tonight. So, but thank you, LFA. It was a very interesting topic to discuss. We have not decided on what next week's episode is, but we'll just leave you in the balance. Maybe we'll throw out a poll and ask if you guys want anything specific, maybe something on the brighter side of life. But that is all I have. Bark, are you good?
I'm good.
Awesome. Shout out to all our listeners and everything like that. We just really appreciate you. We started this so long ago, and now it's just kind of fun to get together and get to chat. So, but until next time, I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
And we are going to be here a long, long time. Have a good night, everyone.
Be safe.
And please be well.